Hi there from Chicago. This is Big Ten Today, presented by Gatorade. Mike Hall and Anthony Herron here. Got a fun-filled hour for you coming up. Both of us were on site not far away from here this weekend. Yes. I had tailgate in Evanston. You had the game.
Were we in Evanston? I thought we were on Maui. That's what it felt like. That's what it looked like, man. I mean, the vistas from out there at Martin Stadium,
it's cool.
Absolutely spectacular.
It is really, really cool. If anybody gets a chance this year, next year, that temporary stadium to go see a Northwestern game in October.
Clock's ticking. Better go.
Or September. It's really, really cool. Speaking of cool, Ross Dellinger joins us. Ross, how about this? Number 2 plays number 3 in the Big Ten this week. It's going to be an awesome weekend.
Oh, amazing. I'm looking forward to the trip out to Eugene. Let me correct myself. I'm not looking forward to the actual trip out to Eugene, but I'm looking forward to being there when I get there, finally. I'm looking forward to the game and the environment there. One of my favorite kind of atmospheres.
We're going to break down that game coming up in a bit. Also, Ross is reporting on some super big news in the world of college sports we'll get to in just a little bit. However, it's time we start off with our big story, which is how good the very top of the Big Ten is right now. The conference has Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State all in the top 5 rankings, 2, 3, 4 respectively. First time ever the league has had 3 teams ranked in the AP top 4. So let's break down what we've learned from these teams at this point through the season, especially from what we learned for those who played in their last game. Ross, Ohio State, there are plenty of stats to pick out. Here's my favorite one. They've won the second half on the season by a combined score of 119-10.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's pretty incredible. You can tell they get better, obviously, as the game goes on. You know, I feel like a broken record. I feel like we say this every week about Jeremiah Smith, but lo and behold, he caught another one-handed catch. You know, had another one-handed catch last week. Just incredible. I wonder if he can make it 3 straight weeks with a one-handed touchdown catch. I don't know that we've ever seen that in college football. It's incredible. But they're 10th in total yards overall. You know, they're breaking 500 yards a game, I think, is the average. You look at statistically, and it's obviously not just Jeremiah, right? Judkins and Henderson at running back, each have at least 40 carries, each have at least 300 yards, each have at least 3 touchdowns. It's been really fun to watch them. And the thing that gets overshadowed, Anthony, is their defense, right? 28 points allowed in the last 4 games. So pretty phenomenal stuff as they head to Eugene.
And the way that they're playing defense, especially up front, Ross, it just showcases the physicality that they play the game with. And, all the weapons that they have at wide receiver and the open field talent that's available at running back. Over the last few seasons, when Ohio State hasn't been able to win the last 3 Big Ten titles, when they haven't won the reigning national championship, their arch nemesis in Ann Arbor is the one who's pulled that off. It's because Ohio State hasn't been the most physical team in the Big Ten in those years. This is the most physical squad that Ryan Day has had in any season that he's led things in Columbus for Ohio State. And that, to me, when you combine that with the athleticism, with the weaponry that's available, is why Ohio State, to me, is now the national championship favorite, because we're seeing tangible evidence of that on the field. And as their schedule continues to ramp up, as the opposition continues to become more and more formidable, of course, that opposition is going to be on display this week in Eugene. But we're seeing a Buckeyes outfit that the versatility that they can access is elite in every which way. So that stands out to me. The evolution that Ryan Day has guided this program through, and Jim Knowles adding into the defensive side of things a couple of years back, Chip Kelly on the offensive side of things, we're seeing the most robust attack that Ohio State has been able to throw at anyone they face.
I don't think I've heard you say that before. Say it again. It's the most physical?
Yes, the most physical Ohio State football team that Ryan Day has coached in his time there. And I mean, just to be frank and honest about it, my concern for a couple of years there with the Buckeye program was as much as Ryan Day enhanced the passing attack, the QB play with all the first-round draft picks, and certainly we've seen historically the first-round picks at wide receiver for Ohio State, but the way they've begun to pass the football, it did start to erode the way they operated on the line of scrimmage. Now, this year's squad, on the defensive front, on the offensive line, they now have showcased the ability to bully people. When you can push the Iowa Hawkeyes around, I know well how Iowa prides the line of scrimmage. And situationally, we saw Ohio State able to not just go toe-to-toe, but begin to move the line of scrimmage in their favor against Iowa. It's going to be another tough test this week against the Ducks. There's no doubt about that. But we're seeing a very physical Buckeye squad that also, to Ross's point, has this otherworldly talent on the outside.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like the headlines around Ohio State for months has been the talent, that they're incredibly talented. Either them or Georgia's the most talented team in the country. I think that's really interesting, hearing they're the most physical that they've been yet under Ryan Day. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why their defense, which Ross was talking about, has been so great.
Right.
5 games, 4 touchdowns allowed for the Buckeyes. That's it. Of course, they're taking on Oregon. It's going to be a massive test this weekend, Ross, and it really feels like this huge game we thought it could be at the beginning of the season, though it didn't feel like that after the first 2 weeks. Remember, those first 2 games the Ducks played, Ross, were a little scary. Ever since then, things feel a lot better.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And one of the things, to tie these two things together, we haven't really seen Ohio State play a close fourth quarter game, be on the line, either the game on the line, and see how that team reacts. We have seen that with Oregon a couple of times, as you mentioned, the first 2 games against Boise State in Idaho. We saw really tight fourth quarters there. But guess what? Since those games, Oregon has outscored opponents 114-37. So things have been working well, most notably the running back, Jordan James, right? He's got 100-yard games, I think, in 3 of the last 4 outings, 4 touchdowns. He's averaging over 6 yards a carry. So they've been really getting it done. As Anthony mentioned, Ohio State being physical, they've been getting it done physically at Oregon. And that was a real issue early in the year. The first 2 games, the spotlight was on that offensive line. They were shuffling about, and now they have, it appears, more of a set group, and they are moving the football on the ground. It's been impressive to watch. And they'll obviously face probably certainly their best team, their best defense this week. And like you said, we knew before the season this game should, have everything on the line, sort of be a top 5 kind of matchup. And for it to actually come to fruition is really exciting.
The collision course that they've been on since the preseason, Ross, and it's good to see them each ascending as this game approaches, because to Mike's point, it wasn't necessarily looking like that early in the season. We weren't completely sure what to expect by the time we got to this point halfway through the season, but now here we are. We're seeing Ohio State showcasing the talent and ability they have, and we see the Oregon Ducks doing the same. And specifically to the perspective of Oregon, they've gotten, yes, a lot more physical up front on each line of scrimmage. I did have probably as many concerns about their defensive front for a while as I did about the offensive line, but now there is continuity up front on offense. You see a D-line that's beginning to stuff the run, and they're attacking. You see Oregon right now on defense, they're getting out of the stack and flying to the football. Their front 7 is chasing. They've got a nice rotation that's there. So even when the ball gets into the open field, that's what you need. You need big guys who are willing to chase the football like banshees, and we're seeing the Ducks start to do that. That shows up on film. That impacts the future opponents who are watching the film, trying to figure out where do we have a potential advantage. And when you can showcase the willingness to play that hard that we're seeing from the Ducks on defense right now, then opponents aren't willing to try and attack you in the same manner. So you feel that defense on film in a way that you didn't necessarily feel the Oregon Ducks defense earlier on in the year. And in addition to that physicality, now you do still have the Will Stein eye candy that's there. So now you can be stressed with athleticism, you can be stressed with physicality, you can be stressed just with the fervor that they can attack you with. And so this will be certainly the biggest and best challenge that the Buckeyes have faced so far this season. And it's the right time for Oregon to begin peaking here. And over the last couple of weeks, like Ross mentioned, Jordan James, what we've seen from Tez Johnson, the explosiveness of Oregon's offense wasn't necessarily there early in the year. So even though Dylan Gabriel is now to a point where he's starting to look a little bit human, he's a little bit imperfect as a quarterback, but still elite, still exceptional.
I was going to say, not bad, just literally not 100% passing
setting
anymore.
all these passing records and everything all over the place. But then you also do have the fact that he doesn't need to be as perfect because of the athleticism that Oregon throws at opponents at this point, where Jordan James, they can block it up a little bit, get him into space, and he can go the distance. So now you're seeing that combination from the Ducks.
There's a good possibility the winner of this game becomes the #1 team in the country.
Yeah.
But there's also the possibility the loser gets a rematch. Remember, there are no more divisions in the Big Ten, so just the top 2 teams. It's possible we'll be seeing the Big Ten championship game about 6-7 weeks early in this matchup Saturday evening. All right, now those 2 are in the top 3, but let's go to the top 4 where you see the Penn State Nittany Lions. Ross, it feels like everything's working. Maybe they don't have their best game, but still, they're running the ball. They're not giving up a ton of points. They're being balanced all around. They're the #4 team in the country.
Hey, they're #1 team in the country according to my top 10 rankings at Yahoo. That's going real well, by the way, with the Ohio State people. The #1 ranking. That's going. I've heard from a few people in Columbus about that. But yeah, Penn State. It just feels like a really well-rounded team, and mainly the reason I have them #1 is I try not to look at preseason rankings and all that stuff. So I'm just taking the schedule that they played, and I think they played probably one of the stronger schedules of anybody in the top 10, and they've dominated most of those teams. I think that they have obviously a nasty defense, right? That's really stood out to me more than anything. It's a remarkable unit what Tom Allen has done there in his first season, just piggybacking off of what Manny Diaz had. 18 points allowed in the last 3 games total for Penn State's defense. How about this stat, Anthony? Before UCLA's touchdown on the last drive of that game Saturday, Penn State opponents had mounted 33 drives. Their last 33 drives, scored on 3 of them. Pretty incredible unit we've seen. One thing we haven't seen as much from Penn State is starting quickly, and that could be an issue. They have had slow starts against Illinois, Bowling Green. Even against UCLA, I think they've scored 21 first quarter points in 5 games. Opponents have scored 17. So I'm sure the first quarter is probably going to be a focal point for James Franklin and trying to get in rhythm a little quicker.
And when we evaluated this roster, this lineup for Penn State, I think part of the curiosity about where they would go as the season wore on was whether or not some of these really talented players, some of the guys that we've seen big things from in their young careers, how big of a step would they take? I think it's undeniable that Drew Aller has taken a huge step in his production this season, not just the efficiency that he's playing quarterback with, but we have seen now the verticality that he's able to add to the passing attack and the mobility that's a part of things. So Drew Aller is playing like a star. The running back position, where you have multiple talented guys, and yes, Nicholas Singleton's been a bit banged up as of late, but whether it's been Singleton or Katron Allen, we're seeing both running backs now looking like the guys they were a couple of years ago with all kinds of production in the backfield. That Penn State defense that has lost talent to the National Football League in the front 7 and on the back end year after year after year. We see dudes at all 3 levels playing big time football, playing like stars. And so the recruiting profile that Penn State has can match up with the majority of the top teams in America, but where they've been perhaps just a skosh behind, where they've come up short against Ohio State and Michigan. I think a lot of that has been, are their stars truly playing like stars in the biggest moments? And now all these star caliber players in State College are really performing like stars this season. So there's not a team in the country that Penn State has to take a back seat to, because you're not looking at this lineup saying, how much more can you get out of Aller? How much better can they look on the offensive line? You're seeing every phase of the Penn State football team showing growth from where they were last year. And so when you have growth, when you have continuity, and you got all that talent that the Nittany Lions can bring to the fore, a defense is now looking like the defense we expected them to look like. This is not only a dangerous squad, this is one of the favorites in the country.
Deep, well-rounded, talented, good things to have. By the way, real quick before we go, step on my soapbox. What Ross said about how he does his voting is exactly the way it should be.
Agreed.
People should vote on what's actually happened, not on what you thought would happen in August or what you think will happen in November. Whatever we have, the the database we have, that's what your vote should be on.
It's hard because human nature takes
preach.
over. You get the preseason stuff, and then people are kind of looking at that. But fortunately, Ross is a cyborg. So his brain
That's
is
right.
a supercomputer. He can ignore all the preseason junk.
That's right. That's how
right.
it should be. We'll get there. When those games happen in the future, we'll see. Things should be fluid, flexible.
More Dellinger-style cyborgs voting on all these things. That'll
All right,
take care of it.
You took a nice thing and you ruined it, Heron. You just dragged it through the mud. Big Ten teams are either at or one game away from being at the halfway point of their season. Look how many have 0 losses thus far, or 1 loss. Sure, for Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State, it might have been expected. But everybody else, this is fairly new territory. So how long can it continue? We're back here in Chicago. Mike, Anthony, and according to Anthony, the cyborg. So let's have you guys build a path for these teams to get their way to the playoff. It is expanded now, 3 times the size. There's the possibility for teams you didn't see happening to make it every single year. Let's start off with Indiana, Ross. They're already bowl eligible. Can they get there?
Yeah, only one of 2 teams, I think, nationally that has reached that 6-win mark. Of course, it's Indiana, right? Crazy. Well, let's start with Indiana's schedule, right? Their toughest games are very much ahead of them, but they do avoid Oregon, and they get a beatable Michigan State team at home. There's potential for a playoff elimination game. You look at the schedule there against Nebraska. They're on Fox. That is a huge game, and that one feels like both teams I think are on a bye this week, and that one just feels like a huge playoff elimination type game. Nebraska already has a loss. Indiana probably can't afford necessarily a loss to Nebraska with what's coming up with Ohio State, like I mentioned on the schedule. But if Indiana can get to that 11-1, maybe even 10-2 mark this season, there's a good chance that they get an at-large berth. There's 7 at-large berths, and the Big Ten will probably, at the rate it's going right now, have 3 or 4 bids into the playoff. You have the champion, of course, and then you probably have at least 2, maybe 3 at large berths. And so Indiana has a real possibility, especially what they've done, up to now to hit that, at least that 10-2 mark, to be right there. If you do the math and you look back the last 10 years, guys, the 11 seed or the 10 seed in an expanded playoff would have probably had 2 losses, some even 3 losses. So huge game coming up next week with Nebraska. Again, feels like more of this, the winner will still have a chance, a large berth, and the loser probably not.
Ross, I had a chance to talk a decent bit to Curt Cignetti last week, and I was asking him, just going into that game, if they hit that 6-win plateau, and they were going to be the first team in America to do so if they got that 6-win, which they did, of course, in Evanston against Northwestern. And I asked Cignetti beforehand, are there any sort of special celebrations planned? It's going to be just yet another milestone early in this season, early in your tenure leading Hoosier football. And Curt Cignetti just kind of chuckled and just kind of laughed it off, because he's been talking about having no self-imposed limitations on his program. So making a bowl game is certainly a nice threshold, but it's not the end goal for the Hoosiers. He recognizes that. His players certainly recognize that as well. So there weren't any huge celebrations about the idea of just getting to that 6th win. And they do appear to be an outfit that can certainly go well beyond that. I mean, they got guys like C.J. West on the inside at the nose, super physical on the interior of that defensive front. They've got pass rushers like Mikhail Kamara who can get after the quarterback, linebackers like Aiden Fisher, a secondary that challenges wide receivers, and we know how versatile their offense is. They've been able to step up to every task, every challenge out in front of them. Certainly a schedule that I think could absorb a loss and still make the college football playoff. But by the end of this thing, if they don't have like multiple ranked teams on the schedule, could an Indiana sustain multiple losses and still make the playoff? It'll depend on other factors, I'd say.
They have 3 conference wins already this year. They had 3 conference wins total the last 3 seasons. Wow. Combined. You mentioned ranked wins. That's something our next team has, the Fighting Illini. They've already got 2 wins over teams that were ranked at the time they played them. Is it crazy to see them still potentially in the playoff discussion?
Not at all. Not in the least. And I mean, for the Illini, because them being one of these squads who sort of vaulted from out of nowhere, preseason expectations weren't that high, early season results weren't overly impressive, but we see a team that's building. We see an Illini program that's now building on that early season success and big wins that were had at home and on the road. And so the voters recognize that, and they didn't drop out of the rankings after a defeat. So now Illinois, I think, is in a great position to continue to build off of where they were, and people are seeing the development that their roster had, that their program is in the midst of right now, and respecting it, especially with the depth of this conference. There will be wins that continue to enhance Illinois' resume, in my opinion, Ross.
Absolutely, yeah. They've got Oregon ahead of them. They got Michigan ahead. So there are games that, in a way, can make up for the Penn State loss. You know, it's not a crushing loss. It's not a season-ending loss. It's not an elimination loss, and not in a 12-team playoff. The margin for error gets tighter now for them. But if you look, you know, Illinois. Penn State is number 4, as we mentioned in the AP poll, and I think the Illini probably need to root for Penn State to do better, do as good, and keep going and keep winning. I know it's crazy, but in this 12-team playoff, you need your losses to be good losses. So Illinois needs Penn State to finish pretty high, and that loss won't be as crushing. And again, there's plenty of opportunity to show the committee that the Illini is a playoff team with Oregon, with Michigan, even Rutgers remaining on the schedule.
Yeah, I think it's entirely plausible they could be a 10-2 team with 2 losses against maybe top 10 opponents. That could have them hovering around that 11-12 spot for sure. Now, we've talked about schedules for all these teams. Ross, you mentioned the fact that Nebraska and Indiana could be a playoff eliminator. That Nebraska schedule that the Huskers have is brutal. The road games still remaining at Indiana, at Ohio State, at USC, and at Iowa.
Yeah, there's certainly plenty of opportunity, right? You could say that. And their margin of error is certainly tight, losing at home to Illinois, right? So that's a little different than Illinois' loss at Penn State. I think that loss will be viewed probably by the committee a little differently. But like you said, plenty of opportunity along the way here. As you can see the schedule there, the Trojans and the Hawkeyes. They've got some games where they can pick up some really key wins. Of course, Ohio State, but you could see them being a favorite in perhaps all of those games except maybe Ohio State. USC has now 2 losses. Iowa, same. I mean, you could see that they could be favored in many of these games going forward. And so if you do the math out, could they end up at 10-2? It's another Big Ten team we're talking about who could reach the 10-2 mark. Indiana, Nebraska, and maybe even a couple of others like Illinois. So they're all going to be bunched up potentially there, right? And they'll probably be ranked between 8 and 12. And you need to have some good wins in some not bad losses on the resume. And it's doable for Nebraska for sure.
Feels to me, Ross, like the bye week comes at a good time for the Huskers, just for where they're at in the season right now, too. You know, they've been stacking wins. We've seen them get to 5 wins multiple times of recent vintage. Their fan base to see the potential for that 6-win threshold to get qualified for a bowl game. That would be a big deal for the fans, for Matt Rule, to be able to get his team, just back in-house a little bit, allow them to lick a couple of wounds with guys who are getting banged up, and perhaps tighten a few screws on some things like special teams. Allow their true freshman quarterback, who's starting to go through the rigors of Big Ten football. Folks have a lot of film on Dylan Raiola. Make sure you can get him coached up. Allow him to exhale for the first time during the regular season here. All those things time up really well for this program. So now they can try to kick things back into gear. This is a defense that shows they can keep Nebraska in every single game. The passing attack and the wide receiver position have certainly shown a lot of life. Do they get healthy on the offensive line, on that line of scrimmage, to add a run game to that passing attack? I believe for what Nebraska looks like down the stretch, really breathing life into that run game is going to be a really big deal for them, because that'll accentuate what they're able to do on defense for Nash Hutmaker and Ty Robinson. The way they impact every game takes a lot of energy to continue to play at that level on the D-line.
And I loved that graphic that we just showed about the turnovers. Remember, they lost 31 turnovers last year,
right?
Only 4 at this point in the season now. And Nebraska has a win over Rutgers. That's the only loss the Scarlet Knights have. That's our last team that's on that perimeter with their eyes set on the playoff.
And Rutgers, so far this year, I really love what they've shown especially on offense. And it's a defense that seems to be growing as the season moves forward here. And my expectation was maybe the inverse coming into the year, even knowing that Rutgers was going to be a bit banged up at linebacker, but we're seeing that now they've just got more games under their belt. The way their defense is starting to play like the Joe Harris-Simiak, like the Greg Schiano defense that we expect coming into the year. And for them, I would say a similar sort of conversation about Rutgers to make sure, because they can run the ball with Kyle Monangai, just continue to lean into that, and that will take some pressure off of Ethan Kaliak-Manis, whether it is a hostile road environment or if they're back at home. Just make sure they remember exactly who they are and how the Scarlet Knights are best suited to operate on offense. Love the potential that Rutgers brings to the table. And there's not an opponent in the Big Ten that I think is going to be eager to face this version of the Scarlet Knights, because the potential that's there, all the experience, Ross, that Rutgers brings to the fore, they're going to have opponents who are going to recognize that even though, maybe there is a slight talent edge here or there, but schematically, and especially some of that intangible grit that can suit key moments in games, Rutgers shows they're usually ready for that moment, Ross.
Yeah, I mean, and the defense, as you mentioned, should keep them in every game. The way they can run the ball and hog the ball and just keep possession should keep them in every game. But one thing that really sticks out, right, about Rutgers, if you look, is that schedule. And we're talking a lot about schedules in this segment, but look at that schedule. There, no Oregon, no Ohio State, no Michigan left on that schedule. Their probably most difficult game is at USC, and they do host Illinois. So it's a doable schedule to see Rutgers getting to honestly 11-1. An 11-1 Big Ten team is getting an at-large berth. There's no doubt about it. Or Rutgers could even drop a game and be in that group at 10-2. So there could be a real bunch for that last at-large spot from the Big Ten, and all these schools are certainly grouped together. But Rutgers has the easiest path of all these schools we've talked about remaining.
And you mentioned all those schools they don't have. They also don't have Penn State, a team that, again, they used to have to play every single year since they joined up in the Big Ten. Now, maybe you're sitting there going, I'd love to see that Scarlet Knight team. I wonder what they look like. Haven't had a chance to. Guess what? You can this Saturday. The Badgers and the Scarlet Knights meet up in our first of two games way later in the evening, 9 Eastern, 8 Central, 6 Pacific time. Minnesota out west taking on UCLA. It's all coming your way Saturday here on the Big Ten Network. So with that, we're in our big picture, and we're going to talk about this. And Ross, how do you describe what turned out to be a very wild Saturday?
Yeah, as wild as I've ever seen. I think you have to go back to 2007, which was a crazy year. We all remember, produced a 2-loss LSU as a national champion. And that was the last time we saw as many top 11 ranked teams lose to unranked teams on a single day. And that's what we saw on Saturday. Obviously, the biggest everybody wants to talk about is number 1 Alabama going down. Didn't expect that on Saturday night I would be seeing the goalpost uprooted from Vanderbilt Stadium and carried down Broadway into downtown Nashville. It was pretty wild to see. And you mentioned the SEC, the other one, obviously. Obviously, Missouri lost too, but we had 2 top 10 SEC teams lose to unranked teams for the first time ever in the history. We had never, ever seen that. So that was quite incredible. It was a wild Saturday, and it's just going to continue, right, to produce losses, right? And when you have an expanded playoff, you can have losses, right? But this gives us, I think, guys, a little window into what we might see in the playoff. There are going to be upsets, and the transfer portal has worked in a way where it has spread out talent, like we saw the Vanderbilt quarterback, Diego Pavia. He wouldn't be there if not for the immediate transfer, the rule allowing players to transfer and play immediately. Comes over from New Mexico State, and without him, they probably don't win that game.
We were just talking about the Indiana Hoosiers a moment ago and their playoff potential as a team at 6-0 in the top 20 in college football. I was just talking to Justice Ellison earlier this morning. Their running back transfers in from Wake Forest. CJ West, their fantastic nose tackle, transfers in from Kent State. A bunch of the main playmakers from the Hoosiers transfer in from James Madison with head coach Curt Cignetti. This is the modern era of college football. We're seeing parity, if you want to call it carnage. It has more even distribution to the competition, to the rosters, to the experience that these programs are able to nurture. Perhaps you pluck some talent over here, you lose a little bit of talent there. Coaches are beginning to embrace it more and more. I look forward to seeing when fans continue to embrace it more and more as well, because yes, some of the storylines make people a bit uneasy just thinking about a player who they liked here, who's now over there. But we're seeing the impact that it's having on the product on the field. The talent is incredible. The results are more sort of well dispersed throughout college football. And so you see marquee brands that had fallen off a bit, like Miami, like Texas, who are now on the come up, on the way back. And that matters with the way that we all consume this sport that we love so much.
And Michigan a couple years ago had gone through plenty of years of downtime, but found their way to come back up. Now, having a wild week is not something crazy new to college football, but there is a new concept out here, and it's a story that Ross was reporting that is absolutely brand new to college football. Ross, you just released an article. People can find it on your Twitter account for sure. I don't want to overly simplify it, but why don't you please give the summary of what it is. The concept of a super league in college sports is at least being considered by a lot of really important people in the sport.
Yeah, it's certainly college athletics is in an interesting position right now, right? Many outside forces, I think, are trying to come in to, quote, fix a lot of the problems that college athletics finds itself in. And I think this latest proposal, because there have been plenty others, but this latest proposal has let's say, caught the attention a little more from administrators. And it's a proposal that basically the two main concepts are to produce more revenue and more sponsorship dollars towards schools that now in the future will have to pay athletes, right? And the way to do that is to arrange schedules differently, which means cutting out Group of Five and FCS teams from schedules, maybe expanding the playoff further, in pitting the blue bloods more often against one another. And number two is consolidating media rights, TV contracts after the current existing agreements are complete. So because of those two things, you have a windfall of new money, this proposal suggests. And about 30 athletic directors in the Power Conference leagues have seen the proposal. Many of them are in support of it. Others not so much. Others are kind of in the middle. And the SEC and Big Ten leaders do meet this week. The meeting isn't about the proposal, but they will certainly discuss some concepts that are embedded in these Super League proposals, like the scheduling arrangement, right? I firmly expect the Big Ten and SEC to strike, or at least talk deeply about a scheduling arrangement in discussing a new playoff format that could include a couple more teams. Maybe there's an expansion of the playoff in a different structure of how automatic bids happen. So the bottom line is these proposals might not immediately take effect, right? Or might not ever happen, right? But the concepts within them are going to happen and they are going to force change from a revenue distribution and a revenue generation standpoints in the Big Ten and in the SEC.
In our last minute on this, Ross, I think you're right. Like, we've heard these ideas before. There have been plenty of grand ideas. Things are almost never just straight up implemented. So what is the realistic, likely impact that this new reporting you had in your story has on the near-term future of college sports?
Yeah, I think we're going to see changes in whether it's the Big Ten or SEC or just in the power leagues from a revenue generation and revenue distribution standpoint. You know, right now, conferences spread out their TV revenue, which is the main source for an athletic department, main source of revenue. They spread out their TV money they get evenly. Is that going to change eventually? That's kind of the question being asked, because in these proposals, that does change. The more valuable, bigger brands get more money, you know. And then again, another part of this is the scheduling arrangement. We're going to see bigger matchups blue bloods, playing each other a little more in order to generate more revenue.
It's an incredibly well-written, well-sourced article. Make sure you read it. Again, you can find it on Ross's Twitter page. Excellent, excellent stuff, Ross. We'll see how it folds out in the coming days. Anthony Herron has his Impact 5 every week, and the assignment is the best atmospheres in the Big Ten, but not really? Explain it.
Well, we spend a lot of time, rightfully so, talking about some of the most tradition-rich, most pristine atmospheres, like the Whiteout in State College, the Wave at Kinnick, but there are so many really special places to watch, to experience college football that maybe get a little bit less shine than those that we would traditionally put at the top of the list. So that's my Impact 5. The Impact 5, sneaky, amazing atmospheres in the Big Ten Conference. So starting at number 5, I'm going to SHI Stadium in Piscataway. Anyone who saw that Friday night game between Rutgers and the Washington Huskies, you saw the light show, you saw the place packed to the brim. Whether you're out there during the game or even the boardwalk pregame, if you've gone and experienced that, you know the pageantry, right, that is just there and available for the birthplace of college football. And now that the Scarlet Knights are back to being a winning program and Greg Schiano has returned home, that is one of the places to go, to watch, to experience that maybe is just a little bit underappreciated. I really think folks have to make sure they know and recognize what's available there.
Number 4 is in downtown Minneapolis.
And I love it. And it's not one of the oldest stadiums in the Big Ten Conference. You know, back when I was playing Big Ten football over 2 decades ago, Huntington Bank Stadium did not exist. But it is here. It is spectacular. And you look at the images from the other night when folks are there and it's packed, the passion that's there for Gophers fans. And they have their own traditions that have now been beginning there at Huntington Bank Stadium. If you want to call it the Vault, I will support you. Go ahead and call the place the Vault. They got their own fireworks extravaganza that's out there after a big win for the Gophers. And when they have big wins there, you see the way that they rush the field. One of the coolest moments, and I love it. I know a lot of folks are anti-field storming. I think it can be done responsibly. We saw it on display the other night.
Number 3, you're in East Lansing, and I will say when Mark D'Antonio was rebuilding that program, I got to see Spartan Stadium be really loud and really passionate.
And it's 70,000 fans, and they show up sort of regardless of the success of the team, pretty frankly. And when they're there, it is extremely loud. And I love the structure itself. It's kind of a metallic venue, and so it echoes, and it feels like the sound reverberates in Spartan Stadium. You feel the volume of Michigan State fans when you're there. I just recall being there, going out to the opening coin toss with the other captains at one point, just going there as a visitor. I'm looking up at Bubba Smith, and I'm like, oh, what's up, Hightower? There's a pageantry to Spartan Stadium that's a little bit underappreciated, I believe. And when you go there and you see the volume of people, the volume of noise that is there, it is like few other environments when Michigan State's rolling.
Number 2 might not make people jump on board because they're having a disappointing season this far. But man, I totally agree with you having Ross say they are really sneaky good there.
I mentioned Kinnick Stadium, which obviously I'm very passionate about Kinnick for obvious reasons, but there's a lot of similarities between the structure of Ross-Ade Stadium in West Lafayette and what it's like when you go to Kinnick, because the confines of the venue are really tight. The people can reach out and touch you. They're not supposed to, but they're close enough to do it. So it's a really intimidating and imposing atmosphere. And in recent years, when we've seen Purdue able to have some of these top 5 upsets of recent vintage when great teams go into Ross-Ade Stadium, a big part of the reason why is because of the intimidation factor that's there when they go. And it's built below ground, so it almost feels like you're going to get swallowed up when the crowd is at full throat. Man, is it a fun place to be.
Number 1 is so good, I don't know if you can call it sneaky anymore.
Well, now that everyone's gotten to see it and experience it in Big Ten country, Husky Stadium is one that, yes, it's hard to say it's sneaky anymore at this point, but from a Big Ten perspective, Big Ten fans are now getting an understanding and appreciation for what Husky Stadium is. Like I referenced with Spartan Stadium, the structure of the venue itself, it allows for an additional echo and volume to it when they have 70,000 plus in Husky Stadium. And the majesty of being right there on Mont Lake, the sailgating and everything else that's associated with it. Also, Ross, it is just a cool place to be for college football.
It is a blast there. Just beautiful. I covered Oregon, Washington there last year when they rushed the field. It was wild, and it is really loud. It's kind of like partially covered, and it kind of keeps the noise at ground level, and it gets really crazy. Hey, I'll throw a few more at you. How How about the Northwestern on the Lake Stadium? As you guys mentioned, opening the show, it looked like Maui out there. In the Rose Bowl at UCLA, I've certainly seen that rocking a few years ago when LSU played there. It was a lot of fun. And last thing, Eugene. Right, going there this weekend, Eugene is loud, and the scene is incredible. You got the mountains kind of in the backdrop there. I'm excited about getting to Eugene and seeing that stadium hyped up.
I'm going to expect to see Ross participating in shout when they play that going into the fourth quarter.
He's going to. The cameras will find him.
Full Animal House for Ross Dellinger.
Austin's interesting because it's not the biggest of stadiums, but it gets loud there. They make the most of the people that are there. That'll do it for our show. Thanks so much for watching. For Ross Dellinger and Anthony Herron, I'm Mike Call. We'll see you next week.